FTTH Council conference here in Luxembourg. You presented the early findings of a unique new study. Tell us what some of the highlights were of that.
Broadband for all is a big topic at this event, and it's been a big topic at this event for many iterations. We think, and we want to demonstrate through the analysis, that the prevailing model to extend broadband as further out into a given country as possible is not really working. And we think that there's a better model that would require a lot less public subsidies. Basically, the prevailing model is a private operator says, well, this is how far I'll go. This is how far it's profitable for me to go in terms of fiber deployment. And then the government comes in and says, well, I'll subsidize you to go further. So that determines kind of a second threshold. And anything beyond that, no one really knows how it's going to be addressed. We believe that if instead of turning to a private operator to do that, we were looking at infrastructure companies to do that, we could get most of that territory covered. In fact, possibly more territory covered than the subsidized version of the prevailing model without any subsidies.
So are we saying if we see FTTH as purely infrastructure, we'll get like nationwide cover?
There's some caveats, because in any geography there are a few outliers that are so complicated to connect that you do have to consider alternative methods, etc. But that should be 5% of the territory, not 25% of the territory, or 55% of the territory, depending on the cases. The other caveat is that infrastructure requires specific business model considerations. The investors are in it for the long term, and they want to have certainty of profitability. And in order to do that, the prevailing regulatory model is probably not adapted, because price regulation is reviewed every 3 years, and depending on changes within the regulators' organizations or whatever, you can have pretty radical shifts in price regulation. And the types of shareholders that will invest massively in infrastructure are very unhappy with that. And so we believe that in order for this model to work, you would also need to look at asset-based regulation, the way, for example, that water and electricity are currently regulated, where what is capped is not the price, it's the amount of profit that the operation can do. And that creates a virtuous circle, because excess profit has to be reinvested, which means more infrastructure. So it creates this kind of dynamic where deploying more infrastructure is an integral part of the business model. It's not anything new, in a sense.
So are you confident it might happen? What do you think? What do you think it'll take for people to look at this business model?
I think, first of all, policymakers need to understand that they haven't been subsidizing more broadband. They've been subsidizing companies that are not well suited to deploy infrastructure so that they could deploy infrastructure. So they have to understand that, and they have to understand that it's a market structure issue more than an inherent issue of fiber. Fiber in and of itself is not expensive, because expensive is a definition of, a private market player saying, well, this is too much and I can't do it. But that depends on who the market player is. So first of all, they have to realize that. And second, they need a certain amount of political courage to say, well, sure, existing players are happy with the market structure, but it's not delivering what we need for our country, and so it has to change. Now, the good news is, in some previous analysis, we looked at the impact of structural separation for shareholders of telecom companies. And actually that impact is massively positive. So we're just at the very beginning of this whole education piece, but we believe that all of the parties actually have only positives in this consideration. It's just that because it's a big shift, it's going to take some time.
Well, let's hope we get there. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.